In this video, we're going to take a look at creating messages. If you haven't already done so, please go back and watch the Design Studio 101 introduction training video. That's going to get you to a point where you should feel pretty comfortable with all the tabs across the bottom of Design Studio. So if you haven't watched that already, please go back and watch that, and then watch this video on message creation. To create a new message, we're simply going to go up to File and New, and we're going to pick Message. And that opens up our new blank message, as you can see over here in the right-hand section of the screen. Before we go any further, I just want to point out some of the properties on the left-hand side. The first thing that pops up on the left in the property window are the message properties. It's important to note a couple of the properties here on the left-hand side before we go any further. First, we've got the message width and height, and the default for that is 800 pixels wide by 600 pixels tall. One of the common things that we hear all the time is that a message gets created and it looks good when you create it, but when you play it on the TVs, it looks either squished or stretched. And the reason for that is because of these message dimensions here. So 800 by 600 is the message size, but we don't necessarily know if that is the right size. And what I mean by that is if we look at our layout tab and we open up a sample layout, let's say that I wanted to create a message for this layout. 800 by 600 is my current message size, but we also need to be aware of the area size that the message is going to go into. For example, if I click on this main area here, the size of the main area, if you look on the left-hand side, is 800 by 720. So it's a little bit larger than the 800 by 600 message that we're working on. If I click on the top right, that is 480 by 360. And if I click on the bottom right, that is also 480 by 360. So at this point, my message of 800 by 600 does not fit the areas within my layout. So before I go any further with my message, I want to decide what size do I want my message to be. For example, if I want my message to go into the main area, I want my message size to be 800 by 720. So I want it to exactly match the sections of my layout. Okay, so I'm going to go back to message 2, and all I'm going to do is change that message height to 720, and that readjusts my message size. The property below that is seconds per slide. That's how long the message is going to stay up on the screen for. Below that, we have audio. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but this is where we could add audio to our message. One of the most important properties of your message is the message lifetime. The message lifetime lets us schedule when the message starts and when it stops. If I click on that box to the right and check Use Lifetime Settings, this is going to allow me to schedule when the message turns on and when the message turns off. So that way, any message that has a definitive end date will automatically stop on that date, rather than you having to go back and police your categories or your layouts for any old messages. This is going to automatically turn off any messages that expire. So for example, if this message that I'm about to create is for an event that happens in May, what I can do is click on the calendar and schedule this message to end on Friday, May 30th. And I could choose the time, and I'll just pick 9:33 p.m. So now, on Friday, May 30th, at 9:33 p.m., this message will stop playing on the screens. The message won't delete, it'll just stop playing and expire. So it's a really nice way to kind of keep the content on your screens fresh. Okay. We'll talk a little bit more about these other properties in a bit, but I want to move on to the message creation itself. So before we go any further, I want to point out a couple things. The dashed line that we see on the right-hand side, that's the border of the message. There is a bottom border, but it is down a little bit further. So you can see here, I can scroll up and down to see the full size of my message. But it's going to be easier if I zoom out a little bit. And even that is not quite enough. I'll go to 50%, and now I could see here is my message. That box represents my message. If I click my mouse inside the box, what I have is the message element. Everything that we put into a message should be in its own separate element. So thinking in terms of PowerPoint, it's the same concept. You have a box for a background graphic, you have a box for text, you have a box for videos, and so on and so forth. We can add as many of these different elements as we need to within a message. Okay, so let's get started. First up, we have our initial element, and you can see here, as I drag my mouse, I am moving that box. What we're going to do with this is we're going to put in the background, and then as we build the message, we're going to add things on top of that background. So I'm going to go down to the graphic tab, and I'm going to go into the background folder, and we have several different background choices. In this example, I'm going to go ahead and just pick geometric, and in this folder we'll see a bunch of thumbnails that we can choose from. The way this works is pretty simple. We just simply drag and drop the thumbnail into our element, and that becomes the background for that element. If I don't like that graphic or I want to try something different, it's just a matter of dragging something else up and it's going to replace the previous graphic. So we're not layering graphics on top of each other, we're just replacing them. And we can continue to go through this until we find a graphic that we like. Okay, I'm going to stick with this graphic as my background. I also want to point out that there is a good amount of space at the bottom of the message where the graphic stops and the message continues. We don't want to leave that space because that would show up as black space on the message. So we want to go ahead and make sure that our background takes up the entire message size. Okay, now that we have our background in place, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to add another element on top of the background. And to add a new element, we can go up to the top left icon toolbar and choose Insert Object. Whenever we do that, it's going to add a new element in the top left corner of the message. We can now take that element, move it around, resize it, and place it where we want this next element to go. Typically what we would do next is we would add text. So to add text into this element, we just double click, and that takes us into text mode. A text window pops up, and now we could type in our header. I'm just going to type in the word header here, and you'll see as I type, the word header shows up on the message. And I could select and highlight that word and change the font size. I'm going to try something large like 80. I can also make it bold, italicized, or underlined. There's also a lightning bolt. And as you can see when I move my mouse over it, it says flashing text. If you select that, the text will actually blink for the duration of the message. I'm going to go ahead and uncheck that for now. And I'm also just going to center my text. Okay. When I'm all set with my header, I'm going to close this out. And then using the font tab at the bottom, I can go through and select the different fonts that I want. So what's nice about this is, just like with the graphic before, we can drag and drop our font onto the message. So I can kind of quickly go through here and try out different fonts to see what works. And once you get the font that you like, we can move on to the next section. I'm going to leave that as is, and again I'm going to add another element. And so we get another element in the top left corner, and again I'm going to resize that. And the next thing I could do here is I could add more text, I could add more graphics, I could add videos, and I could add sounds. So it really depends on what your message is on what you would add next. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and go back to the graphic tab, and I'm just going to go to the folder called icons. And the icon folder contains all kinds of graphics that we can add into the message. I'm going to go to food and beverage, and I'm just going to pick this cup of coffee. And just like with the background before, I'm going to drag and drop the coffee into the element. And as you can see, that takes up the element. I'm going to go ahead and add another element, and I'll drag that over to the right. And again, what I will do here is I'm going to add some more text. So again, double click, and then I'm going to go ahead and type in some text. And again, I'm going to highlight my text, and I want to increase that size a little bit. It's a little bit hard to read. We want to do at least a 43 font. 43 would be the bare minimum for which you can read from a decent distance. I'm going to go ahead and take that up a little bit higher to 55. I'm also going to change the color, and we can do that right next to the font size. And I'm just going to try some different fonts out. Black looks pretty good, so I'm going to leave that as is. And again, I'm going to center it. Close that when I'm done. And again, I can go back to the font tab and I can choose a different font. So I will just try Curve. At any point during my message creation, I can always go back and make changes. So even though I put the background in first, I don't have to be stuck with it. I can go back to the graphic tab and go to backgrounds, and I could select a different background. So what I would do here is click back on the background and drag up a different graphic, and that's going to replace my current background. As you can see, that one doesn't look so good. I'll try another one, and we'll go with that. That kind of matches. So at this point, we have a message, we have a background, a header, a body, and we have a graphic inside of it. So we could say that we're done with this message and it's complete. The next step when you're done with your message is to publish it. You have to publish every message that you want to play on TV. So to publish the message, we're going to right click on the tab at the top and we're going to choose Publish. This is going to do two things. It's going to ask us to save changes, which we're going to say yes. And we're going to give it a name, so I'll just call this Training Message 1. And now that I've published it, we'll go to the Message tab, and there it sits. The green check mark next to it indicates that this is a published message. So now the message is published, it's ready for use. The next step is to get it to play on your TVs. And I do have the sample layout open at the top. And one of the things I can do is I can just simply drag and drop my message into the area where I want to play it. If you remember from the beginning, I designed the message to match the same size as the main area. So what I should do here is drag message 1 into the main area. And you'll see it does bring up the main area playlist. And in that main area, we see the different weather categories as well as our new training message. The other way to do this is to use a category. So if we go to the category tab and we'll say there's a human resources category, I can double click to open that and go back to my messages and drag my message into the category. So it really depends on whether or not you're using categories. There's another training video on categories and channels that explain the uses of those, but for now, let's just move forward. So going back to the sample layout, once you place your message into a layout, you then need to save your layout. So you have to save the changes so that your player knows that you've made some updates. So I'm going to right click on sample layout and I'm going to choose save. So right now, any TVs that had the sample layout scheduled will now update and they will now include my Training 1 message. If I were to do my categories, what I'm going to do with categories is I'm going to publish the category the same way that I published the message, which is right click at the top, publish, and say yes to changes. So now, just like with a layout, any of my TVs that have the human resources category scheduled will also update with my new training message. And that's it. The other thing that we still need to look at is the property window on the left-hand side. And we're going to save that for the next video. So at this point, we are all set. We've created a message, we've published it, and it's playing. That's the basics of it. Now, the next video will take a look at some of the finer details of adjusting your message. Thanks for watching.